I slammed the car door shut, feeling the cool night air against my skin as I sat behind the wheel. The engine roared to life, and I drove aimlessly, my mind too full of chaos to focus on the road. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to escape. I needed space, time to think, to breathe without the weight of Claire's lies pressing down on me. I ended up at a quiet park, the empty swings creaking in the breeze. The darkness felt like a blanket, wrapping itself around me, and for a moment, I almost wished I could just vanish into it. I got out of the car and stood there, staring at the empty space. This park had been a place where I used to go with Claire when things were better between us. We'd sit on the swings, talking about nothing and everything, our lives stretching out in front of us like an endless horizon. But now, standing there alone, everything felt so distant, so broken. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through the photos I'd taken earlier. The images of Claire with that man were seared into my mind. There was no denying what I had seen, and yet part of me didn't want to believe it. I wanted to convince myself it was all just a misunderstanding, that maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But the nagging voice in the back of my mind told me the truth. Claire had been hiding something from me, and now I had to deal with it. I could feel the anger rising again, but this time it wasn't just about her betrayal. It was about everything that had led to this moment. The endless hours she spent at work, the late nights, the business trips that never seemed to end. I had been so wrapped up in my own work, my own responsibilities, that I had let her slip away without even realizing it. I hadn't been the husband I should have been, and now everything was falling apart. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I needed to think clearly. I couldn't let my emotions control me. The last thing I wanted was to make any rash decisions. But what if there was no coming back from this? What if this was the end of us? Could I really rebuild after everything that had happened? I had to be honest with myself. Claire had already checked out. This wasn't something that could be fixed with a conversation or a promise to change. She had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. I stood there for a while, lost in my thoughts, before finally heading back to the car. As I drove back home, my mind was still swirling with possibilities, with questions I didn't have answers to. The one thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't keep living this way. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. When I got home, the house was still eerily quiet. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment, trying to summon the strength to go inside. What was I even supposed to say to her? Should I confront her again? Should I ask for an explanation, even though I already knew the truth? I opened the door, and there she was, sitting on the couch, her face expressionless as she looked up at me. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there watching her, waiting for her to speak. After a few moments of silence, she finally broke it. "You don't understand," she said quietly, her voice flat. "You never understood." I wasn't sure what she meant by that, but the words hit me like a slap in the face. It was as if she was trying to justify everything she had done. I could feel the anger start to build again, but this time, it wasn't the kind of rage that would make me yell or scream. No, this was something colder, something sharper. I had reached the point where I couldn't be angry anymore. I was just done. "Then explain it to me," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Tell me why you're doing this. Tell me why you're with him." Her eyes flickered, and for the first time since I confronted her earlier, I saw a hint of something, regret, guilt, but it was fleeting, and before she could speak, I cut her off. "You don't owe me an explanation anymore," I continued. "You've made your choice, Claire, and I've made mine." She stood up quickly, her face flushed with frustration. "You think you're the only one who's been unhappy? You think I've been living this perfect life while you were off doing whatever? You've changed too, you know. You stopped being the man I married a long time ago." I shook my head, not even sure how to respond. Maybe I've changed, but that doesn't justify what you've done. You can't just throw everything away like it doesn't matter." I could see the conflict in her eyes, but it was too late. We had both been so caught up in our own worlds that we had lost sight of each other. There was no way to go back to what we had. The trust was shattered, the connection broken beyond repair. "I don't want to do this anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't pretend to be someone I'm not." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Then don't." And just like that, everything changed. I stood there, frozen, as the weight of her words settled into the air between us. She was serious. The finality in her voice left no room for doubt. Claire wasn't going to fight for this. She wasn't even going to try. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. All the years we'd spent together, the love, the anger, the silent compromises, everything seemed irrelevant now. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me was relieved. The constant tension, the feeling of living in a house with a stranger, was finally over. But another part of me was devastated. I had spent so much of my life trying to build something, to create a future with Claire, and now it was all crashing down around me. I didn't say anything. I just turned and walked toward the door. I could hear her calling after me, but I didn't look back. There was nothing left to say. She had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. I stepped outside into the cool night air, the silence swallowing me whole. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't even know what I was doing. I just needed to get away. The streets blurred past me as I drove, my mind racing, but the truth was I had no plan. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there. Not with her. Not in that house. I drove for what felt like hours, the emptiness inside me growing with every passing mile. Eventually, I found myself parked outside a bar, its neon sign flickering in the darkness. I didn't even know why I had stopped. Maybe I just needed a drink. Maybe I needed to forget everything for a while. I walked inside, the dim lights casting long shadows across the room. The air smelled of stale beer and the faint scent of cigarette smoke. It was a far cry from the life I had once known, but at that moment, it felt like the only place where I could breathe. I made my way to the bar and sat down, ordering a whiskey without even thinking about it. As I took the first sip, the burn of the alcohol was almost comforting. It numbed the pain, even if only for a moment. I stared into the glass, watching the amber liquid swirl. The bartender glanced at me, but I didn't feel like talking. I didn't want to explain myself to anyone. I just needed silence, space to process everything that had happened. I couldn't help but think about Claire. Had she already moved on? Was she with that man again? The thought made my stomach churn. The betrayal stung, but it was more than that. It was the realization that I had been living in a relationship that had been falling apart for far longer than I had admitted to myself. I had been blind, caught up in the routine of daily life, too focused on everything but the one thing that mattered most. Us. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. I didn't even need to look to know who it was. I'd been expecting it. Claire. I hesitated for a moment before pulling it out and reading the message. "Are you going to leave me like this? After everything we've been through?" I stared at the screen, the words stinging like a slap. I wanted to answer, to say something, anything, but I didn't know what to say. What could I say that would change anything? What could I say that would make her understand? Instead, I put the phone down on the bar, pushing it away as if it were an unwanted weight. I didn't want to talk to her anymore. Not tonight. Not when I still couldn't wrap my head around everything. Not when my mind was too clouded with anger and confusion. The bartender returned with another drink, but I didn't touch it. I just stared at the empty glass in front of me, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on me. I had no idea what I was supposed to do next. There was no roadmap for this kind of situation. I couldn't go back to her, not after everything. But at the same time, I couldn't keep living like this, drifting from one day to the next, pretending everything was okay when it was falling apart. I stayed there for a while, lost in my thoughts, my mind a constant whirl of questions with no answers. It felt like I was trapped in a storm, and no matter which way I turned, I couldn't escape it. Eventually, I stood up, leaving the bar without another word. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face as I stepped outside. I didn't have a destination, but something inside me urged me to keep moving, to keep going, even if I didn't know where I was headed. I found myself walking aimlessly, the city streets stretching out before me, illuminated by the pale glow of streetlights. I didn't feel anything anymore. No anger, no sadness, just a profound emptiness. I had tried so hard to hold on to something that was slipping through my fingers, and now there was nothing left but this hollow feeling that consumed me. I walked for what felt like hours, until my feet were sore and my body was tired. But still, I didn't want to go home. Not yet. I couldn't face the silence, the reality that Claire and I were no longer the people we had once been. As I stood on a street corner, looking out over the city, I realized something. No matter how hard I tried to avoid it, the truth was clear. Claire and I were finished. She had made her choice and I had made mine. There was no going back. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stay stuck in the past. It was time to move forward, even if I didn't know where that path would take me.